Okay, well, hello and welcome to this session. I am Brandon Nichols. I'm engineer at Kuali. I'll be serving as the host for this session, and we are glad that you're going to be able to join us today. So this session is going to be it's the rules, tools, diffing, and dependencies session. And it's going to offer a transparent, or I'm sorry, next up there, curriculum management. It's offering a transparent solution into your curricular ecosystem. It identifies impact through dependencies and intuitively guides users with next generation smart forms. It explores techniques to design a form your faculty will love by working smarter, not harder, with rules, diffing, and dependencies. So just a few things to remember that we will have a question and answer session at the end. In the meantime, you can put questions in the chat and we'll see those and go through those. We will get through as many questions we can at the end as time allows. Remember that you are on mute, and let's see if there's anything else. The session will be recorded, and there will be a link to the recording at the end. So with that, I'll turn our time over to Eric, one of our dev managers at the company. And there you go.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, I'm Eric. I've met many of you. I'm happy to see some familiar names in the attendees here. So welcome. As Brandon mentioned, I'm an engineering manager for Kuali on the curriculum management and catalog products. This is going to be sort of the structure of our presentation today. So we're going to go in fairly deep detail through introducing some of the different capabilities of the rules functionality within curriculum management. And we'll be talking about some of the rules configuration options, how we use, how we highlight changes between versions, what we call diffing, in between versions when you're making changes to those rules. And then the dependencies, uncovering those dependencies using the rules engine, and then the dependencies gadget in the system. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started on an introduction to rules. And wanted to start first with a definition of how we use this internally. So rules are really just going to be the requirements or linkages between different types of curricular records, like courses and programs and specializations. They're going to handle things like prerequisites and co-requisites and all kinds of other things. We'll go through some specific examples here. All right, so we've got probably the most common example, prerequisites. That's generally going to be on the course level. However, it can be, of course, used on other forms as well. Got an example here just showing an example rule of a prerequisite. So we've got complete the following course. This is fairly straightforward, standard example. We can also do other commonly used rules like completed a minimum number of courses or earn a minimum credits or things like that are pretty common use cases here. And then we've got co-requisites, just highlighting this example down here. This is probably the most common co-requisite example, concurrently enrolled in the selected course or concurrently enrolled in a minimum number of courses, something like that. Admission requirements, say on a program form, admitting somebody to a particular program. Here's just a quick example where you must have a minimum GPA of 3.0 and completed all of the courses from this course set that we're using here. A course set can be used to include a list of courses in a rule, and then you can reuse that course set throughout. And then graduation requirements, probably the most common, or program requirements, probably the most common use case at the program level. And this is where the rules really tend to get to be more built out. We're showing an example of different categories of rules here, and I'll get into the categories configuration a little bit later in the presentation. But yes, you can see this is organized by semester 1, 2, 3, 4 in this case, and there are lots of different options available there. So we want to talk about some of the key options available to us in rules, and there are lots of options available to this piece of the software. It's probably the most the most complicated piece of functionality within the software is the rules gadget, the rules engine here. And so we like to say there's so many options that it's almost like there are no rules because you can do lots of different things. And it's also all you can eat in that you can add lots of different rules fields to different forms. So an example could be maybe you have a rules field for prerequisites and a rules field for co-requisites and maybe anti-requisites, or say on the program form, you have program requirements and then admission requirements, or things like that. Some people are using this a separate rules field for a sequence of courses and things like that. There's really no limitation to the number of rules fields that you have on the form, but you want to think about your users and how many fields they're having to administer when they're making their program records or course records, things like that. So one of the first features that I want to go over in rules is a really key feature, and that's the way we use logic within the rules engine to be able to handle different types of requirements or different combinations of requirements. So I'm going to click over here to this animated GIF that I've embedded in the presentation. And this is just highlighting that you can add any number of rules to a particular field. In this case, we have a prerequisites field with 3 different rules on there. And for all of your rules, when you have more than one, you're going to be able to select that somebody has to complete all of the following, and that's going to make all of those rules required, complete one of the following, or 2, or however many rules there are minus 1, essentially. So you can allow for lots of different combinations of rules that way. And this plays into the next piece of functionality that I want to talk about, which is groupings. And groupings are going to allow you to establish different groups of rules within a single rules field. So for example, here we have a prerequisite where somebody has to have completed this English 101 and English 102. And if I wanted to make a group of rules here that starts with this rule, I can simply do that by selecting this more options here and then creating a group from there. Once I created a group, it's going to nest that existing rule inside a group here. And from there, I can click this plus button to add an additional rule or multiple rules as needed. So clicking that into there is going to add a rule, and then I can define that rule however I would like. In this case, we've got another completion rule with some additional English courses. So this could be sort of like an English prerequisite group, for example. And of course, I can apply logic not only to the top level where you're seeing this all of the following, but also within the group. So if in my group I only need to complete one of these 2 rules, I can do that. So the combination of grouping and the logic component really allows you to capture a really wide variety of requirements. And we have yet to see many examples that we can't capture within the system using this kind of logic and grouping approach. And of course, you can add additional groups as needed. So I've got another one started here just below. And so you can add multiple groups as needed. Generally, of course, prerequisites tend to be a simpler administration of rules, but that is available to you should you need it. One thing I wanted to point out here is how the logic plays into the credit totaling within a group and other areas of the rules functionality. So we have right now a credit total of 6, and that's happening because we have the complete one of the following logic applied to this group, where we have one rule with 2 courses, each 3 credits, totaling 6, and the same for the second rule. So it's dynamically calculating the credits based on that logic and the courses that have been entered in there. All right, I want to talk a little, shift focus and talk a little bit about categories. Categories are going to be most commonly used on a program form where it makes sense to break out the rules into different groupings. So what I'm showing here is just part of a rules field for an existing program. So we've got semester 3 and 4 showing here. And in this particular example, this is a particular example of course sequencing. And so some institutions will have designated fields for course sequencing. And it really allows you to break up those rules into other things like core and elective requirements or by year, really however you want to go about that. And you'll note here as well that we've got the credit totaling also dynamically applied to the rule grouping. This is something that can be turned on and off. So you can have rule categories without the credit totaling if you don't want that to display. And you'll notice here at the top, we've got a range of 6 to 10, and that's really because of this special topics course that's in there that's established as a range credit course. So because that's included, that's affecting this total here. And then these are all fixed credit courses down here, which leads to that 10. And then when you total these 2 rule categories, as well as the other rule categories that you're not seeing on this screenshot, it's going to bring up that total of 118 to 122 in this particular case. All right, so within the rule category, you're able to select some predefined categories. Those categories are going to be defined by an administrator, and I'll be covering that a little bit later in the presentation under the configuration section. And you can set those to be a standardized set of lists of categories. You can also allow custom rule categories here. And those custom rule categories are going to allow the end user to be able to name the categories whatever they want. So this is really a good fit if different programs really need to group their rules in different ways. But if as an institution you decide you really want everybody to use the same types of categories, then you can turn the custom rule category option off and just have people use the standard set of rule categories that you set in the system administration area. Rule categories can be set to inactive. Some institutions will use this if they need to still display maybe a prior set of rules that applies to some portion of the student body, but maybe not incoming students. That can be a useful setting there. Rule categories can be set as optional. So maybe you have a set of elective requirements or something like that. And then you can enable rule subcategories, which is just going to allow you to set some subcategories within the system. So clicking ahead here, here's an example of custom. We've got a top level custom rule category and then a rule subcategory below there, where I can add any additional rules in there. So lots of options in terms of nesting categories and structuring your rule data as you might need. All right, I see a couple questions. I just want to pause here and make sure we can get those answered. So the prereqs are put in the form. Do they then directly feed into the student information system? So when a student tries to register for the class, it stops in the prerequisite and does not exist in the student record. Yeah, great question. So the consumption of that data in the student information system is a configurable thing as part of the integration strategy. So it really depends on what you want the data to be consumed, but it can be configured to do that. Our rules data follows a certain structure, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later. So hopefully that answers your question. And then one other question, if a group contains courses that have different credits, would the credits total be a range? Yeah, I'm guessing that came in before I went over the example with the range, but yes, that it will handle that dynamically. One thing to note about the credit totaling is it is dynamic for any rules where it's going to make sense to do that. I've displayed mostly rules where dynamic credit totaling will happen, but there are some rules like an average GPA or something like that that of course won't figure into your credit totaling or anything like that. Would core, elective, gen ed, other requirements be programmed as a subcategory? Another question about categorization. So it's really up to you how you might want to use categories. So if you could set one top level category and then make subcategories for core and elective and gen ed or other requirements. You could have those as top level requirements. It just depends on what's going to make sense for your particular program or to your end users. Generally speaking, I would say we've found that people that have adopted the strategy of using categories at the program level without subcategories is probably the most widely used. As you get more and more nestings, of course, sometimes that's necessary, but it does add levels of complexity there. All right. Finally, with rule categories, we have 4 different modes essentially for setting whether rule categories can or should be used. So you can set a particular rules field to be able to always use rule categories. This is really going to make it so the users must use these categories here. Must select from at least one category and add their rules to that or use multiple categories. We also have 2 additional settings to allow rules categories. Either you say you can set it to usually or sometimes. It's a minor distinction, but usually will allow you to activate the categories by default. So this checkbox would then appear and be checked by default. But sometimes if you select that, it's going to, if you select the sometimes option, it's going to be unchecked, and then users can activate that if they want to use the rule categories. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how we store this data within the system and how we represent that. So if you're querying for rules data using the API, here's an example of what you might get in the response. So here's a course record, and we have some requisites data and some co-requisites data. And like I said, I don't really want to get too much in the weeds here, but this is how we represent the data, and then that's what renders in the curriculum management side. So suffice it to say, we're storing some logic information, we're storing some keys for each of the different rules. And then within the courses, we're storing what we call the parent ID. So all the versions of a particular course are going to share a parent ID. And then that parent ID is used to make reference to the appropriate version of the course based on the dates, the start date and the end date of whatever is making that reference. Here's an example of what a program requirement might look like. And this is where we get into the rule categorization. So we've got a groupings array of different rules in there, and then and multiple different groupings in there, and then logic throughout. So again, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here, but just to give you a sense of how we store this data in the system. And then also wanted to point out that for reporting purposes and other types of use cases where you don't necessarily want to parse through all of those nested objects, we do store a cached version of the rendered text that appears on the particular record. This cached version is available on the meta attribute, and then each field is given an attribute with text at the end of it. So when using the API, you could leverage the API to pull in this data and have all of the text already rendered for you. You wouldn't have to parse through any of the requirements, logic, or nested objects or anything like that. And here's just one more example of what that looks like for the program record that I showed. So we have the requirements there, and the requisites and the co-requisites here, and then we have the program requirements and the acceptance criteria record as well. Okay, that's enough looking at JSON data. Let's talk a little bit about rules configuration. So there's a lot of flexibility within the rules configuration, and I want to go over some of the options available to us within the system. So from the system settings rules area, an administrator, a system administrator, will be able to navigate here and see a list of all of the top level categories of rules. Clicking into a particular category will reveal the list of rules or subcategories within that category. And this is going to correspond to the options that display to your end users. So just going back to what it looks like to edit one of these, you can see here we've got completed all selected courses. So this is the primary category rule here. And then the secondary rule that's been selected here. And if I have three options, you've got the primary category of rules here, the subcategory of rules, and then finally the rule. And this particular rule is going to have a number field to specify the number of courses, and then of course adding the ability to enter the courses. Back at the rules administration area, I can click into any one of these rules, and it's going to give me a number of different options that I'd like to go through. So the rules options here, we really allow pretty robust control over how the rule is going to display and how a user is going to select that rule. So from this rules administration area, I have fields for what the menus will look like, as well as the rule output. And then you can see down here a sample of what that looks like. Right now, this rule is using the default, but I'll show you an override of that in just a moment. And then down here with these checkboxes, you're able to check and uncheck where this particular rule can be used on a particular form. So in this case, we've activated this completed all selected courses for the course prerequisite rule, and then some other rules within the system, but not the co-requisite rule, because that rule just doesn't make sense to be something you could select from in that particular case. And we have institutions that are, leveraging this pretty heavily to make sure that the rules you have available are able to capture everything that you might need in terms of requirements, but you're striking that balance of not overwhelming your users as well. Okay, and here is an example of, we've just changed the word completed to complete, both in the menu and then in the rule output. And that, of course, is going to carry over into the rule. If I go ahead and select this rule, I now have a complete option instead of completed. And then I'm picking that all selected courses, and that complete has carried through there, both in the edit view as well as in the view mode of this particular record. So this really gives institutions the flexibility to be able to customize the language to match how you talk about requirements and prerequisites at your particular institution. Generally speaking, you're going to want to use wording that essentially means the same thing, because there are some rules, for example, that are built to total credits and some that aren't. So if you completely change the meaning, you might get some unexpected behavior, but you can customize it to match the language that you might want it to display. All right, I want to talk a little bit about rule categories and the administration of that. So in the system setting rule categories area, this is where you're able to establish the default categories and subcategories that are available. So you can see here that we have core requirements, other requirements, elective requirements, general education requirements. These can be anything that you might want. And then the ability to allow custom rule categories or not allow that if you don't want people to be able to add their own rule categories. And the same would be true for subcategories. In this case, this particular instance is configured with 4 default rule categories and then allowing custom rule categories. And then on the subcategories side of things, you can check or uncheck this. In this case, we're saying anybody can rename whatever the subcategory they want. They can name it whatever they want it to be. And then we even have the ability to change the language for what we're calling these things. So at Kuali, we try to be mindful of different types of the way we call different things, different nomenclature, things like that. So lots of options available to meet your users in a way that is going to be understandable and intuitive to them. All right, want to talk a little bit about how we handle changes between versions. So there is an option in the system. It's how we're configuring most new customers, unless it's specifically asked not to be this way. That when you propose changes to a particular record, we're going to granularly highlight the rule changes as they're being made. And we've found, as we've gathered feedback since this feature has been released, that this makes it much easier to very quickly identify just the rules that have changed, which helps to speed up the review process. So here's an example of that. In this case, we've removed this particular course in a rule. So we've just deleted that course from the rule and added a new rule where we're requiring that somebody's completed 4 courses from a course range. So we've got the subject code Chem 400 to 600 in this case. And again, just emphasizing that, this, just at a glance, you can see exactly what's changed, and that really helps to speed up the review process. Also, the new rule that we've added here is a subject code range, and because we're within the system referencing a subject code and then 400 to 600, that's actually going in and querying all of the available course options within the system. And it's dynamically changing this credit total. So the user, when they changed this, all they did was remove this course and add this new rule. But because the credits are changing and that dynamic credit total is changing, we're of course highlighting that at the top of this rule category. And then that would also be highlighted down at the bottom where the total credits are shown. All right, I'm going to go ahead and shift focus to the dependencies portion of this. So we define dependencies as records that are linked in some way to another record through the use of rules. And all of our partner institutions can leverage this functionality by using the rules. And we've found that this has made it so much easier to understand exactly how a course is being required by other courses or programs, and really to be able to preemptively catch impacts to other curricular records that might have previously gotten lost in the process, and then you have to sort of put out fires because you weren't aware of what a program, what a change to a course might affect. So on any form, we can add the dependencies gadget. Here we've put it inside of a panel, and we're looking at this Math 124 course. And so for any type of, for any course or program in this case, we're showing all of the things that are making reference to this course. So we've got a list of courses here at the top, and then a list of programs immediately following. And so if I'm proposing changes, I can expand these and very easily see exactly what the course that's requiring this is requiring. So I can see that this Math 126 course is requiring this course and some other rules within that particular record. Similarly, on the program side of things, I can expand that, and that's going to reveal right on my course record all of the requirements for this particular computer science program in this case. And so this really helps to reduce the number of clicks that you need to do to find this information. You don't need to go track down the computer science program. We're just going to deliver the relevant information with regard to rules here within the system. I want to pause here and see if, I know that there have been some questions that have come in, and I want to see if there are any questions about some of the options within rules before I move on here. Okay, great. So I just want to close with a few things to keep in mind with this functionality. So we've built this to be really powerful. It's built to capture a lot of different scenarios of rules, and it's built to be flexible to meet the different kinds of needs that you have in terms of the way you call a requirement a certain thing, the way you build your rules, the way that we apply the logic to the rules. It's meant to deliver transparency across the system. And that transparency can be a really powerful tool for collaboration and understanding how different cross-departmental courses and things like that are connected.
Hey, Eric, there's a question that came in. Who can we ask to check that we are building these efficiently? Oh,
great question. Yeah, so that would be a great question for the customer success manager. Your customer success manager would be able to schedule a review of some of your records, and that would be a really good thing to check in on for sure. And I see there's a question about course sets and rule sets. I would like to come back to that at the very end, but I will answer that as well. Okay, so there are just so many options, as you've seen, and there's like a lot of flexibility within the system. I just want to leave you with this pro tip before we go into the Q&A, and that is to start with the smallest acceptable list of rules that will, of course, we want to be able to accommodate your institution's needs. But starting with a small list will limit the number of options that users need to select from. It'll make the data more consistent across different types of records, and it'll make it more understandable to students. These rules, of course, carry over to the catalog, and we found that as long as we're able to accurately capture all of the different scenarios, the simpler that we can be with that really helps to that ultimate goal of student success. And so that's the pro tip that wanted to just leave you with here. And then I'd like to go in and answer some of these questions that have come in here at the end. Okay, so there's a question: if we have already built rules and those rules are being used in a program or requisite, can we update the language without rebuilding the requisite or program in its entirety? Yes, you absolutely can. So those, because on the data side of things, we're using keys for those rules, that language is dynamic. And so if you make a change to the rule configuration, and I can actually just show you here in this particular instance. If I go in and make a change to, say, this complete rule that I was highlighting earlier, any record that is using this rule is going to automatically consume this language change. And so you don't have to rebuild all the rules to have that language be updated. Of course, you're going to want to be careful with that because you don't want to completely change the meaning, because then that's going to have a meaningful impact on the curriculum. But if you're just changing, say, completed to complete, that's pretty straightforward. There was an earlier question about course sets and rule sets, and we didn't touch on that much in this overview. I did mention course sets. But rule sets and course sets are ways to be able to make reusable rules objects. So in the case of course sets, I'm not honestly sure if I have a wonderful example here, but in the case of course sets, I'm able to create a list of courses that can be then reused across different curricular records. This can save on the amount of time that you spend adding individual courses if you have a common set of courses that you reference within different programs or courses or things like that. And then rule sets are similarly reusable rules objects. I'm just going to click into this last one here, and hopefully it has some information. Yeah, so rule sets are essentially another instance of rules that I can create to be able to reuse this in an individual record as well. So this is probably most commonly used as a general education application. So if you have common gen ed requirements across all different programs, you could build that once here and then reference that rule set within the program requirements. All right, there's a few more questions here. If a course is in the prereq rule and gets updated with an end term and is no longer active, does the rule recognize that and automatically take the course out of the logic? This is actually a configurable setting. So we have the ability to always reference the latest active version of a course. If there is not a latest active version of the course, it will show, it'll make reference to the inactive version, but it does not automatically remove that requirement for you. The system can also be configured to time box the requirements essentially. So if I have, say, version of a math course that's starting in 2021, but I have a program, or 2022, for example, but I have a program that ends in 2021. It will, if configured this way, it will reference the 2021 or earlier version, whichever is the latest within that date range for the system. There's another question about administering the course sets. That is an admin functionality, although I believe it can be activated for other roles with the permissions functionality. But yes, it is not a general user course set general user activity. Course sets are intended to be something that a system administrator is going to be managing. There's a question about the time box functionality. The time box is universal within the system. So if you select that option, it's going to apply to both courses and programs. Is there a way to alphabetize the course sets? The course sets are going to be showing in the order that they are created, just like the courses that are added to a particular rule as well. So that order is preserved as you make them. Great questions. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this particular piece of functionality. As a reminder, we are running a competition for this conference. If you scan this QR code, you can submit what you would like to automate with Build, which is our general purpose workflow and forms tool. And always excited to see the ideas that come in from those submissions. So definitely encourage you to submit that and tell us about what you're thinking about. All right, and I would love it if you'd rate this session on the Socio app. All of that feedback is really important as we conduct this conference, and yeah, I hope this was a valuable session for you all. Lots of ground to cover, lots of complexity here, but I hope it was informative. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.